that's how we process stuff. That's how we process dreams. Like if we believe our dreams matter to us and that they can tell us things about the psyche, they're speaking through the language of archetypes. They're speaking through the language of symbol. And I think that's given me a greater understanding of who I am as a person right now, where I'm at and where I want to go.
Very well said. So, which leads us to the next thing, and that is, you know, your work in the world and what's got you fired up now, because you're obviously a very passionate man. You've cultivated a beautiful spiritual relationship. You're what I call a true physical philosopher, and I found some of the most physically impressive people truly develop this kind of philosophy, which is kind of counter to public culture. What are you doing now? What's got you fired up? Where's things going for Kyle these days in your life, and how are you expressing yourself in the world?
Yeah, there's a couple of big things. You know, I've had a lot coming up for me with the birth of our daughter, and she's coming, you know, end of June, early July. And that's a ceremony in and of itself, the birth ceremony, the pregnancy ceremony. And I've really, you know, I take that very seriously. You know, we have a home birth scheduled, which is our first time. Bear was born at Stanford, but it's put pressure on me to be better as a father and to be a better man. And, you know, we talk about putting things in cruise control. Our son Bear is 5 years old, and he's an awesome human being. He's doing great. He was in his first year at Waldorf last year, and his teacher had nothing to say but nice things about him and how caring he is and compassionate and all the little things that you can't see when they're away from you. And it's like, wow, dude, we are doing a great job, but we're not sitting on that. And I realize our children are our teachers, you know, so what is this little girl going to teach me about being a man, about being a father, and being receptive to that? How can I embody more of that? How can I embody more of the divine feminine? How can I be a receptive listener to those teachings from my little guru that's about to come into the world? And with that too, on the flip side of that coin, how do I embody more of the divine masculine and be the best version of myself? And that's led me to a lot of work with the archetypes. You know, Paul Chek is big into this. Caroline Mace's work is phenomenal. Sacred Contracts. The King, the Warrior, Magician, and Lover by Robert Moore is absolutely fantastic. I took a deep dive into that book. And that just, again, you know, like when we talk about plant medicines, a lot of times they're speaking in metaphor, they're speaking symbolically. And if archetypes seem far out there for people, that's how we process stuff. That's how we process dreams. Like if we believe our dreams matter to us and that they can tell us things about the psyche, they're speaking through the language of archetypes. They're speaking through the language of symbol. And I think that's given me a greater understanding of who I am as a person right now, where I'm at and where I want to go. And that's kind of the lens that I'm looking through. At the same time, I've been working with a guy named Dr. Will Tagle. And I've never met an elder, when I think of tribal elder, that holds that word the way he does. He's written, I think, 8 books. He has a PhD in psychology and a PhD in physics. And he's, you know, when I first met him, you know, he lives about an hour outside of town of Wimberley. He says that we're basically bridging 2 worlds. His life's work has been at the intersection of a river where one stream is modern medicine and the other stream is ancient wisdom of the natives. And with that marriage, he really bridges the gap. And a book that I read of his called Walking with Bears just takes the absolute deep dive into his history with a guy named Bearhart Williams, who was his mentor and guide, and just dives into everything from quantum physics to psychology to the healing powers of nature to tapping into the eco fields. You know, if everything is conscious and everything is alive and everything is intelligent, how do we access that information? And there are ways that we can tune into those fields, you know, and I think he's just a brilliant human, you know, a brilliant elder. And I will be working with him to do my first vision quest. You know, I've experienced, you know, 26 ceremonies with ayahuasca. I've done many more with psilocybin and a handful of other really powerful teachers. And I also know that this old school method, you know, this old school method for rites of passage, for initiation, is something that I've never done. And I feel that 4 days with no food or water out in a sacred space is really going to help me just further whatever the next track is in life. And so I'm really looking forward to that. And it's been a great privilege of mine to be able to work with Will.
Yeah, that's I remember reading about vision quests when I was a young teenager, as a native, one of the native traditions that were passed on, and I was always fascinated with that process. And I always kind of mourned the concept that we really lost that in the modern world, this kind of technological world, this kind of cerebral digital world. And here's something where you take yourself out into nature and you take away everything essentially, and you just sit there, and then, as they would say, the spirits come. And Carl Jung, who I'm a big fan of, and one of the founding members of the archetype concept, certainly in modern westernized thinking, talked about accessing universal consciousness, and of course was attacked viciously by his mentor Freud, but still had the courage to kind of go forward. And so many people that I admire have been tuned into that. How do you apply those archetypes, or how you apply what you learn in the spirit realm or in the plant medicine world into a daily practice? And then how do you use this in your business world, for example? And maybe you can share a little bit about that for people.
Right. Well, I mean, I think plant medicines will give me, obviously they're going to speak in metaphor, and sometimes they just tell it straight to your face. Sometimes it'll just say like, hey, you're not getting any new information because you haven't employed any of the practices we've told you to. So with regard to yoga and meditation, and through the experience of that, I get the value of it. And then I continue without having ayahuasca slap me on the ass saying, you got to do this or you won't get any new downloads. When it comes to the archetypes, I think one of the best ways that I've worked with something like King, Warrior, Magician, Lover is to actually take inventory. It's very hard for us to see what's in our shadow because it's not in our purview. Other people around us can, but it's very hard for us to see that. That's why Robert Moore says, you could be in a temple, you could have the medicine, you could have all these things, but without the elder to help you unpack that experience, without the curandero or the black belt shaman to work with you, you're kind of on your own. And it's really hard to be able to unpack that fully. And I've had beautiful experiences that were solo, but my best experiences were guided. And so when we work with something like the shadow, the ego does not want to look at that. It's impossible for the ego to admit, I have this thing that I do when I'm in a big state of fear or a big state of anger. So one of the ways that we allow the ego to take a back seat is if we review it in the past tense. And so if I look through something like King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, where there is two aspects of every shadow, there's the active and the passive. And I say, where in my life has this showed up? Where in my life has the boy psychology and the boy psyche showed up? And I can actually see patterns start to form. For example, my parents fought a lot. They were like two rams butting heads, and there was a lot of anger, a lot of rage in the home. And with that, I would always go into a shell. It was a passive shadow archetype where I would just become a mute, and I would pretend I'm not there, and I would just watch and just go silent inside. Anytime I was in a state or high intensity situation outside of my family life, rage would come out, the active side of that shadow. It could be a teacher, a principal, a kid on the schoolyard, it didn't matter. If it wasn't my parents, they're going to feel it. And now I can see those patterns still show up. So one of the things that they talk about is we get locked. If there is trauma within the boy or the little girl, those patterns keep showing up as a way to revisit. And something the Native Americans talk about is that nothing is linear. We go through cycles. And as we go through these cycles in life of a spiral upward, we get to revisit the same thing at different intervals of our life. And they're check-ins to see how we process it with new eyes, with a new understanding in life. And if I can look through the past and review that and see patterns, now I can see, where does that show up now? Well, for a long time, the first 5 years of my relationship with my wife, if her fire showed up in an argument, what would I do? Passive. Mom's mad, right? And I would just go into a little shell and not talk, and that would piss her off even more. So if I can recognize that in myself in the moment, I can bridge the gap of not having to experience a lot of time in rage or in a little shell inside myself. And I can actually just breathe into that wherever it is, draw my awareness and my breath to that. Am I feeling tight in my throat or my chest? Let me take a couple deep breaths here. Let me process this. Let me not take it personally, right? And then from there, I can start to assess things in the light of those aspects, in the light of the warrior, where I can set clear boundaries, in the light of the king, where I have a calm and compassionate way that serves the kingdom, whatever that kingdom is, even if it's my own psyche, or if it's my family, or if it's my job and my business and the people that I'm around, to be able to approach those things in the highest form of those archetypes. I now have a language to do that. I now have a language to embody that, and I have a deeper understanding of where I've been and where I want to go. So this gives me a roadmap into putting very practical ways of communicating with others, very practical ways of checking in on myself. Like, oh, I'm feeling nervous, or I feel anxiety, or I feel anger. And that's a big part of the feminine. The feminine is listening to that. I always talk to people, if somebody's going to do a plant medicine ceremony, it's very important you remain in the feminine. It's very important that you listen. The second I start talking to somebody else in the ceremony, it draws me out of my experience of receptivity. There's no more downloads going on when I'm talking to you about it. There's no more downloads when I'm writing an essay on everything that's going on. If I'm Bob Costas with the play-by-play of my experience, nothing new is coming in. So I have to remain in that state of receptivity. And then, can I be in that state of receptivity when it hits the fan? Again, this was the impetus of fighting. Like, can I actually become so aware where I tune out the noise of my conscious mind and dip into the super conscious, where I dip into my heart center, where I dip into my gut intuition, and from there operate non-reactively. And I think those are the roadmaps that help me put that into play.
Wow. So well said. And what I love about what you've shared with us today on the Awesome Health Podcast is how you've taken your experience, some of the more challenging experiences at a human condition, and found a new way of recontextualizing it. And then you've taken things out of the esoteric realm and you've applied it on a daily basis with some practices and some insight and some application. And how did you get to that? And are you doing this for other people? You're helping other people, I understand, and this kind of thing? Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, seeker is one of my archetypes, and the seeker teaches what they learn, and a lifelong student as well. That's another archetype when you talk about sacred contracts and Caroline Myss's work. Very much I'm passionate about the things that I learn because I want to share that with others. It's not just for me. If it's just for me, it's worthless. It certainly would help me out in life, but that's a way we give back. People always talk about giving back, and it's like, well, shit, if Maslow's hierarchy of needs is not completely in order, I don't have a lot of money to share. I don't have a lot of food to give out, but there's always something we can give, and that's one of the things that drew me to coaching others. Whatever is hot on my plate, that's really something I'm passionate about, I'm going to take a deep dive into that. And from that, I'm going to be able to help people that are in a similar path, because in a way we are all mirrors for one another. And those that are drawn to us, that attracts like, that brings us in with the attractor beams, we're going to mirror each other in many different ways. And we can see that in others. We can then see that reflection back upon ourselves, and we can help each other in that way. And, it's been a beautiful experience. One of the things they teach you in jiu-jitsu is the more you teach, the more you learn. So they'll have purple belts starting to teach the kids, and brown belts, co-assist some of the adult classes. And then when you're a black belt, the more you teach, the more you learn. It doesn't matter who you're teaching. And I think it was Chekhov and says this. I don't know if it's a paraphrasing, but if you can't explain it to a kid, you don't know what you're talking about. Einstein's quote, right? So can I figure this out well enough that I can explain it to anybody? And from that, thankfully we do have a large group of people, about 120 people in Aubrey Marcus's mastermind, which is an annual group called Fit for Service that I get to coach. And then I'm doing private coaching as well in what I call the inner circle. And that just continues to fuel my desire to want to learn more, to want to know more, and to want to embody more, because other people's issues, if I'm looking closely enough, have either been an issue of mine in the past or might be an issue of mine in the future. So can I build some equivalency with all that's going around? And that is something that connects me back to humanity. That's something that connects me to my own humanity. And I think people can forego that as they start dipping into the spiritual and the esoteric and the land of psychedelics. Is like, Ram Dass said it beautifully when he was in one of his lectures in the Audible Becoming Nobody. You cannot forget your humanity. It's why we're here. And Will Tagle talked about this. In the West, we forego our lives to reach heaven. Here doesn't matter. Everything that I do is a payment going forward to get me into heaven matters. And in the East, all that matters is an enlightenment, so I don't have to come back to this place. But in the Native American wisdom, God is here right now. It's in everything. And this place does matter. What I do does matter. And what I do right now within myself, within my family, within my community, and for the good of all relations, that actually does matter. This is where it is. And everything that comes after that, I'll deal with that when it comes. But right now is the only time that matters. And it's the only time that exists. So how can I be of service right now? And I think that's really the things that I focus on.